in this question, this principle, be who you are on purpose. So one question that arises out of that is, well, who am I? Okay, so I'd like to propose to you that there are default answers to that question. The default answers are the immature answers we described earlier. So if you're not intentional in who you are, you end up being your instinctual whims and your drive to power. So basically, it's what a 2-year-old does. And I even mean that neurologically. It's like, a 2-year-old isn't very mature. They aren't who they are on purpose. They're operating on instinct and whim, and they have to be socialized into the adoption of a higher order self. So you might ask yourself, if you're not your short-term desires or your short-term avoidance, your short-term wish to avoid pain, who are you? Right? And that would be who you are on purpose. So you might say, well, where can you find who you are? And so I want to ask you what you think about this. There's a gospel statement that describes the nature of our relationship with divinity in a very optimistic manner. And it proposes that if you knock, the door will open, and if you ask, you will receive, and if you seek, you will find. And so I've tried to make that concrete. Let's say when I was operating as a behavioral therapist, when I was trying to help people discover who they were. And so one gateway to that is to ask yourself, this is in keeping with your principle 10 too, to treat yourself with dignity and respect. Imagine that you are caring for yourself as if you're valuable. Right? Give yourself the benefit of the doubt. And then ask yourself, this is part of the development of the vision, ask yourself, if you could have what you needed and wanted in a manner that would be best for you, what would that look like? And you'll get an answer to that question. You'll start to be able to develop a vision of what your life would be like if you were deeply who you are in a way that was sustainable. And then you can start doing that on purpose. Now, the reason I'm asking you that question and presenting those possibilities is because the question of who you are, that's the question of identity, is begged by your first principle. When people are saying now that they're their sexual identity, right? That's the biggest claim in our society, and that they should be proud of that claim. And to me, that just reduces who someone is to essentially to a very unidimensional biological drive that seeks immediate gratification. It's a very low order conception of who you are. So when you say be who you are on purpose, what do you think you're pointing to in that who you are?
I think it is a much harder question than people anticipate when they begin, which is why I say you've got to really sit down and think about this. Because when you ask somebody, tell me who you are, and you cannot use your occupation or what you spend most of your time doing in the answer. If I take that away from them, like if you're an accountant, that's what you do all day, 50, 60 hours a week. And I say, tell me who you are, and you can't use your occupation in the answer. It's astounding to me how people struggle, because they identify themselves with labels. And, I'm an accountant, or I'm a welder, or a welder's helper. And now, as you say, a lot of people have adopted a cause, and so they put that like they want to tattoo it on their forehead. That's not who they are.
And sometimes do.
Yes, exactly. But that's not who they are. Who they are is multidimensional. It cuts across intrapersonal, interpersonal, spiritual, familial. It cuts across a lot of different levels. And I think it comes down to a real heavy, if you're doing a weighted equation, you have to give heavy weight to what they believe and what they're passionate about. And if in that description, there's not something in there that they're really passionate about, I really say, wow, I would encourage you to seek that passion, because I think going through life without a passionate pursuit, man, that's got to look like 9 miles of bad road. I mean, you're just pushing a rock up a slippery hill. If you're not passionate, if you're passionate about something, then all of a sudden work becomes something that you want to do. It becomes something. It maybe your work and your vocation and your avocation can't be the same thing, but if you ever hit that, you've won the lottery. If you love what you do enough that it's both your vocation and your avocation, and
right. Well, I think that's the fortunate circumstance that you find yourself in when you align what could otherwise just be whim with a higher order calling. And I think the traditional insistence, there's a traditional insistence that the Spirit of God is the divinity in calling, right? And you're pointing to that. You're using secular language and likely purposefully, but your notion is that there are things that will interest and compel you in your life, and your job is that's the call of the treasure that the dragon guards. That's a good way of thinking about it. And that if you pursue that infuses your life with a kind of sustaining meaning. When I wrote my first book, when I wrote Maps of Meaning, I wrote a chapter in that book called The Divinity of Interest, and it was really a paean to calling. And I knew it was incomplete. And so I want to run this by you because I think this is implicit in your principles too. You say, for example, don't reward bad behavior or support conduct you do not value. That's number 3. Do not stay silent just so others can remain comfortable, actively live and support meritocracy. Those seem to me to be pointers to integrate conscience with calling, right? So imagine that there's 2 mechanisms that orient you towards your higher realization. Let's put it that way. One would be the calling that infuses your life with significance and meaning, but it can go off track, right? It can become a delusional enthusiasm or a whim. You need another countervailing force that's something like conscience. And maybe that's the voice of integrated negative emotion, the warning voice. And so the calling says, go this way. And the conscience says, yeah, but stay on the path, right? Don't be tempted by short-term callings. Stay on the path and keep yourself in check. And so that seems to me to be manifested, for example, in this. Let's look at number 6 just briefly. Do not stay silent just so others, you could say as well, do not stay silent just so others and yourself can remain comfortable. And you mean temporarily comfortable, I would presume, in that utterance as well.
Yes.
So the question that begs is, well, look, if I can stay silent and other people are comfortable, then why shouldn't I stay silent? And so let's walk into that. What's your sense of that?
Well, my sense of that is that you have a lot of people right now that are going to be uncomfortable if you call out some narratives that are being pushed on society that don't gel with your values, don't gel with your sense of factual base and science. And that's why if you look at number 4, measure all actions based on results and all thoughts based on rationality. And you're right. I'm describing these in secular terms on purpose, and people think, well, rationality is not a word I use every day, so how can I use that? It's really very simple. Number 1 is that thought based on verifiable fact. So if you have a thought, and we tend to believe ourselves, right? I mean, if I put a blindfold on you and walk you around downtown or whatever, and you believe I've walked you to the edge of a 10-story building, and you believe that, we tend to believe ourselves, and that's what you're telling yourself. You're going to fight like trying to put a cat in a sack if I'm getting you to take the next step. You're like, whoa, no, I'm not going to do this because I've told myself this is going to be a doozy when I take this step. So if you're telling yourself that, you tend to believe yourself. Well, we've got to start getting people to verify their thoughts. I say that to people that are suicidal all the time. Test the rationality of your thoughts. Is what you're telling yourself this? Are you telling yourself you want to die, or are you telling yourself you want to stop the pain? Those are two very different things, and both of them have long-term consequences. So let's really test that out. Second, does it protect and prolong your life? Does it get you what you want? I mean, there are just some very simple questions that you can ask yourself, and all of a sudden, if it fails any of those simple criteria, then you go, okay, I got to replace this with something that fits the criteria. Now, people aren't just kind of wandering around deciding, well, I trusted myself, but I didn't really know how to test my thinking. Well, I'm just giving them a very simple way to test their thinking. Number one being, is it verifiable fact, what you're telling yourself? And if it's not, don't even go to number two. You've got to deal with facts and reality. And people that are rejecting science, saying biology just doesn't apply. We're going to decide that we're changing all that. There aren't men and women. We're going to change all that. Well, I'm sorry. You don't get to just decide that. Yeah, I guess you can decide that for yourself, but you're certainly not going to decide it for me. And if you're pushing that agenda, that's where you can't stay silent so others remain comfortable. You just can't let them run roughshod over you and everybody else with that agenda, just so they don't get upset with you for saying, no, sorry, I'm not going to let you rewrite biology for me and my family, me and my life. I'm not going to let you pretend we didn't have slavery in our history just because you've decided that it's not good for kids to hear about that. Well, I've decided it is good for kids to hear about that. I've decided they need to know that there were dark times in our history, and we can only learn from those dark times by acknowledging them. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. You've got to acknowledge this. And so I think I'm trying to get people to start thinking, but if you give them some rules for thinking, they're going to be more efficient about it.